Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. Boo boo bodacious. Whoops, let me move my mic over. I don't know why I had it so far. Hopefully, the audio's coming in good, loud and clear. I've had pretty good technical quality lately, I'd say. That's what I've noticed. Good morning, Bitcoin Graffiti. Hope you're doing well. Good morning, Boo Boo. Hey, P-Man Van. Well, no spoilers. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. P-Man Van letting us know the sun is up. Good morning. Let's do some Bitcoin. We love doing Bitcoin. We love doing Bitcoin. TGIF, LFG, indeed, B for victory. We love it. Good morning, Daniel. Hope you're doing well in Vermont. Hassan, good morning. Good morning, Hassan. Good morning, Bud, and good morning, Dex. Hope you're all doing well. Indeed, P-Man Van spoiled it, but guess what, everyone? The sun is up. That's not the whole story. Bitcoin's also running. All that's left for us to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. Now, as you know, we like to start every one of these morning gatherings with a little bit of Moscow time, right? We need some Moscow time. I had the good fortune of being on stage a little bit at Bitcoin 2023 with the Blue Collar Bitcoin podcast folks. They're firefighters, and I wonder what they would think about the following. So this is from the Free Beacon in Seattle. Seattle firefighters now drilled on Ibram Kendi before promotion to top jobs. So they got to learn about what's going on with Ibram Kendi. And here's what the tests look like. To see if they're up to snuff, most departments administer a written test, typically multiple choice to prospective lieutenants. Candidates must score above a cutoff to be considered for the job, with higher scores increasing the odds of promotion. The exam, which covers a litany of technical topics, is meant to ensure that the people making life and death decisions know the bare minimum to make them well. So firefighters in Seattle were shocked when their exam focused almost as much on social justice as on firefighting. Now, that maybe will give other people some hope and certainty that the Seattle firefighters aren't going to be racistly selecting who gets saved, because it looks like what's happening in Florida might be the opposite. So this is, be careful, right? Here's what The Root says. Should Black people be afraid now that Ron DeSantis plans to announce his presidential bid on Twitter? It's the Twitter part, I think, that meant they should be afraid, apparently. Scientific American has a pretty good one. No, we said there would be a lot of debt ceiling debate, and a lot of people calling for, catastrophic outcomes with the debt ceiling debate, but Scientific American has brought up a new risk that we need to mention here on Moscow time, really important. The US debt ceiling crisis could harm science for years to come. Science could get harmed, guys. Careful. We're putting science on the line here. And the tweet that went with that headline was, investments in research and development are likely to drop, even if the worst case scenario is avoided. So that's pretty bad. Now, MSNBC has a really good one. And it turns out that if you have these debt talks, right, you're actually, right, so you're actually testing Americans' intelligence, but not the way you think. Not the way you think. Here's what MSNBC says about debating the increased debt ceiling. If Republicans are actually right, many Americans will have to live with the shame of knowing they were intellectually bested by the likes of Donald Trump, Matthew Gaetz, Kevin McCarthy, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? So that's how they're testing the intelligence. So if they're right, then the intelligence was tested. That's what's going on in the news today, guys. All right. So one of the things that is in the news, it's part of these Durham findings. We were waiting for the Russia collusion report for a long time, and finally it came out, and people are saying, it's pretty damning evidence on which participants. Now, like I said many times, I've basically forgotten the details of the Russia collusion story because it's very boring. And it's a lot like the Mar-a-Lago case. It's a lot of document management. And then this person in the government did something they weren't supposed to do. Now, I understand the story underneath it all is really salacious. We are dealing with government officials that spied on a presidential campaign and knew it, right? Knew that they were spying. There was no real excuse for what was done. It was clearly political. And we know that because the Durham findings have showed that the number of participants who knew the Steele dossier, so the one where apparently Trump peed on prostitutes and it was being used to leverage and blackmail him. So that whole story, they knew from the beginning was false. And that's what the Durham report actually found out. But here's the interesting thing. And I think what's most relevant for Bitcoiners is the following. So Rasmussen, the polling outlet, released this finding from some of their questioning and their own polling stuff. So they got some Democrats together, and it's called Durham Findings, Democrats React. And here's what they discovered, that legacy media has been somewhat effective in shielding Democrats from the Durham findings. Now, what happened in these questions with the polling is they just asked the questions normally, right? So what do you think? Was there collusion? Da, da, da. But then they explained what happened in the Durham findings. So they just gave them the results of the Durham findings. I don't know what format they gave them the Durham finding reports. So was it very persuasive? Did they sit them down and tell them, no, it was like this? I'm not sure of the details, right? So I don't know all the methodology here, right? So I don't know the methodology. But what happens is once people find out what was in the Durham report, and once they see the actual characters and events put in their proper order, almost every Democrat completely changes their mind about what happened. So I'll read it, right? Here's what happens. One interesting finding of the survey is how many voters were apparently unaware of the Durham investigation's conclusions. The first question in the survey asked, how likely is it that Donald Trump's presidential campaign colluded with Russian agents during the 2016 election? 43% believed it was likely, including 26% who thought it was very likely. 47% said Trump-Russia collusion was unlikely, including 38% who believe it was not likely at all. 2/3 of Democrats thought it was at least somewhat likely that the 2016 Trump campaign colluded with Russian agents, as did 24% of Republicans and 34% of voters not affiliated with either major party. However, after hearing a one sentence, okay, so pardon me, here's the actual methodology, if you will, right? So I'm not totally unaware of what they did. However, after hearing a one-sentence description of the Durham investigation's findings, i.e. the officials knew the Clinton campaign was the source of the false claims, even 44% of voters who previously said Trump collusion was very likely were in favor of prosecuting the FBI officials involved. Among those who said Trump-Russian collusion was very unlikely, 91% want criminal prosecution for FBI officials who promoted the false claims. 74% of Republicans and 45% of Democrats and 60% of unaffiliated voters believe FBI officials involved in promoting the false Russia-Trump claims should be criminally prosecuted. 84% of Republicans, 45% of Democrats, and 59% of unaffiliated voters at least somewhat agree that the Russian collusion charge against Trump was a well-orchestrated hit job by the Clinton campaign and government officials. Now, what I have to say about this is that it really is the most important political story to explain what's going on right now in our world, right? Any mystery you had about what's happening right now is actually in this finding, right? So once Americans are presented with a similar set of facts, let's say, they tend to have a kind of a common sense about stuff and will actually coalesce around one point of view that makes sense to the most amount of people. What we've been saying for a long time is the spin and the lying are what keep people at so pumped up and angry and ready to be at each other's throats and to hate the other person and to hate the other team and to be in your what we've called the fake prison of two ideas, right? When you get stuck into the binaries, and that's a Greg Gutfeld expression. when you get stuck in these binaries of blue and red and all that stuff. But in fact, when given a point of view that isn't designed to spin you and get you angry at the other person, the other team, the other gang, you actually will come up with a reasonable opinion. And that includes the Democrats, who many Republicans think just have, brain damage or mental illness or something like that. So even those folks, when given a more aggregate point of view, right? The sort of thing Community Notes brings up, a more aggregated point of view, then and even in re-injecting context into any one of these stories, so that they're not just spin, so that they're not just designed to get you angry, like the debt ceiling one we just mentioned, right? Science for years is going to be affected if you don't do it. So that's definitely designed to put a spin and create a reaction inside the audience's mind. And remember one thing I mentioned that RFK said, which I thought was not just brilliant, unbelievably simple. And that made it, when things are simple and it makes them even more brilliant, right? Just because they're simple, they're not complicated. This idea of how to bring Americans together, even everything that I'm saying right now, as long as you take the focus and have an aggregate re-injection of context, then Americans will understand. Well, when they asked RFK that question in an interview he did a little while ago, and I've mentioned it many times here on the Breakup in the Morning, they said, how are you going to get Americans to come together? And he goes, stop lying to them. That's it. Stop lying, right? It couldn't be more simple. Stop lying. And the lies can be lies of omission as well, which is what we see with these Durham findings, right? That this has been kept from the American population, that Americans don't even have access to this information unless they go seek it out and look, is one of the main reasons why Americans are so full of anxiety and fighting each other all the time. It's simply because the important information is just not even on the table. They're not being presented with it. The context that I think would bring a lot of Americans together on these issues is all too often ignored and shoved to the side. Even mentioning RFK himself, right? Let's give a bit of context for a second to RFK. You get all this attention now on DeSantis, right? DeSantis, is he a challenge to Trump or not? DeSantis enters the race, right? We saw everyone yesterday, and remember all these folks, he's even worse than Trump. It could be worse. Like, how many headlines did we see with that yesterday, right? He's even worse. Oh my God, if Trump is here, this one is even crazier. So a lot of people talking about DeSantis and the threat he poses to Trump and the threat he poses to American systems and those sorts of things. But here's what you don't hear from the Democrat and liberal press is that RFK Jr.'s polls, his numbers relative to Biden are higher. He's doing better relative to Biden than DeSantis is doing relative to Trump. Now, look at the amount of attention that the mainstream media is giving DeSantis, right? I mean, it's everywhere. It's all over the place. Bungled announcement, right? That's what they went with yesterday, the bungled, embarrassing announcement. But nevertheless, people talking about his throwing his hat into the ring and getting involved, and what is it going to mean for the Republican primaries, and are they going to debate, and what's going to happen when all these people start to enter, right there. So what they're not talking about as well is the diversity in the Republican field, first of all, right? You're not hearing any stories about the diversity. you got Tim Scott, who's an African American. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy, right, who's Indian American. You've got what's her name, Haley, whatever, she used to be a governor of South Carolina or something, Nikki Haley, right? So the Republicans have all this diversity, right? The Democrats are stuck with Marianne Williamson, RFK, who isn't a WASP, right? Did you know WASP being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant? Almost all American presidents, except for Biden, Obama, and JFK, were WASPs, right? JFK, of course, famously a Catholic, which excludes you from the WASP title, right? So So, and Biden as well, apparently a Catholic. So, not technically part of that majority that is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant in America. So, at this point, Biden and RFK are the two most diverse candidates that the Democrats have, simply because they're Catholic, which hardly qualifies for most people, I would say. So the one of these stories you're just not even hearing about is the diversity of candidacy on the Republican side. Now, remember, we're not here as Republicans or anti-Democrats or anything. We're here as Bitcoiners, right? And one of the things that Bitcoiners bring to the table that's different is this different perceptions. We have sources of information coming in from all over that is just not the same as the force-fed narrative machine that either political party is simply force feeding their audience with stories they'd like them to focus on, they'd like them to get engaged in. It's been one of the problems with the Republican Party for a long time, I would argue, in the same way that Democrats can't live without stories of racism. Republicans simply can't live without stories about abortion, right? They can't live without them. They need the fundraising, they need the anger. Now, what has been achieved in the years of debating abortion, other than what happened with the Supreme Court this year? I saw it firsthand in Canadian politics, right? I saw it firsthand in Canadian politics. I don't know if you guys know this, but abortion in Canada, for example, has no limit, right? It has it because the court said it years ago. So it can be one of those situations that you see in the United States, people debating about now, a really late term, right? So not saying that a lot of these are performed in Canada. I don't know the numbers. And just so everyone knows, right, I am a big proponent of males not actually having an opinion on abortion for real. I'm one of these people who says, women can absolutely figure this out and I'll live with whatever conclusion you come with, but I will not live with women being silenced on it. I think that's the only role males really have to play when it comes to the abortion debate, is just making sure the fight is fair and there isn't censorship and there isn't people getting silenced, which has been part of the fight until now, right? You haven't been able to talk about it. And it was the fight within conservative politics as well. In Canada, that's what happened, right? When the government that I worked with promised they would have conversations about it. It wasn't about creating rules or anything like that. But what they said was that there would be a conversation about when is it illegal, right? When does life begin? Because in Canada, it's unassisted breaths of a baby outside of the womb. So they have to be born and they have to take established breathing in order to be considered alive. So that was going to be investigated. And who shut it down? A majority conservative government, because they didn't want to talk about it. Now, why did they not want to talk about it? Just a guess. But if you solve the problem, right? If all the global warming people admitted tomorrow that nuclear reactors solved global warming, would they be willing to do it? Because it shuts off the tap for their research and their stuff and what they're working on. So do some people want a solution, especially the people working closely in it? It's the same as the race baiters in America, right? Does Al Sharpton really want America to embrace a post-race happy time golden age? Of course not, right? He's not going to get invited to all these things anymore. He's not going to be as important and all that. So Austin says a very Canadian opinion on abortion. Well, it's an extreme opinion, right? I can go left of Bernie on abortion, right? I think Bernie should shut his mouth. He shouldn't even talk about this issue. And I think that's the case for most men. Now, of course, I have an opinion, but it's not, again, I'll live with whatever. I really will live with whatever is decided. And I think you're going to get that in the United States. I think every state is starting to have these conversations, and that's one of the big differences that came with Roe v. Wade being overturned, is that you can have a more nuanced state approach, which, I mean, like I said, it's fine, right? So what we're really talking about here today, though, is what focus brings and what putting attention on one issue brings, and then what not putting any attention on an issue brings. And that's where Bitcoiners open the door to a whole new reality for American politics, simply because we're not getting pre-programmed and persuaded, right? Not persuaded, persuaded by all of these political parties, which keep us from talking about the aggregate of stories, which would be important. And the thing with all of these candidates now on either side, we've got DeSantis, we've got Vivek, we've got RFK, all of these people talking about Bitcoin is going to force way more issues into public consciousness than Americans are used to seeing, and that are certainly not going to be scripted from the two major political parties who are simply trying to maintain donor bases. It's the one fault of, I would say, like Ted Cruz, for example, right? Ted Cruz, who goes on about being a Bitcoiner all the time in Texas and blah, blah, blah. But he's a master at keeping issues unresolved in order to keep his fundraising going. Now, anyone who supports Bitcoin I'm a kind of a one-issue guy on politics, right? So I don't have any problem with Ted Cruz as a politician simply because he's a Bitcoiner. If he ever spoke against Bitcoin, and I don't trust he won't, what I see is someone who's never really been able to deliver much effective legislative change. He really is a master fundraiser and a master inciter, right? In the same way that I've accused all the major media companies of being drug dealers, right? Here's some dopamine, here's some get angry, right? Get all worked up. I've been saying that for a long time. Fox News being a dopamine dealer, CNN, MSNBC, all these folks being dopamine dealers, all of them drug dealers. I would put Ted Cruz in that category too. He's a drug dealer, right? Outrage, get angry about this thing and give me money so I can run a political campaign again. And that's why Trump was so effective when he debated him. Lion Ted, remember Lion Ted? Remember when remember when Beto was running against Ted Cruz in Texas? He was actually just taking Trump's talking points, and they struck hard every single time. He just used Trump's attack vectors on Ted Cruz, and they struck each and every time. So look, Ted Cruz, Bitcoiner, apparently great, right? One issue voter here. But he's not really someone who's bringing all kinds of outside perspectives to the table when it comes to this stuff. Not like RFK, for example, right? What RFK has done, something a thread I never even pulled on in my entire time following politics, any of these debates. You hear the typical response to the shootings, the mass shootings in America: gun rights, no gun rights, right? Ted Cruz has been in the center of all of that stuff. Give me money, I'll protect your guns. Great, right? RFK is the first person I ever heard who focused on something that I didn't even know it was at issue, right? That Americans also have not just more guns than anyone else in the world. They have way more prescription medicine addictions than anyone in the world. It's not even close. Like the delta between America as the most prescribed drug takers in the world versus the second place country, I think, is greater than the delta between America as the highest per capita gun country and the second place country, which I think is Switzerland or something like that, right? So that delta is actually bigger. That, from what I hear, I'm not fact checked. I'm sure this can be fact checked easily, but that's what I've seen. That's what I've heard, that America does have this incredible distance with the second most prescription drug addicted country in the world. So when RFK brings up that it could be the drugs causing a lot of these mass shootings, right away, this stuff was ignored. But that looks a lot like what we're going to see going forward. Bitcoiners bringing in inconvenient subjects, and that you have all of these new sources of, and follow the money, right? RFK came to Miami because he passed the hat around, right? Why did we get all those politicians? They passed the hat around, right? They want the money. But when you pass the hat around, you also get exposed to the people in those communities. And now that the Bitcoiners have been seen by politicians as a credible source for campaign donations, they're going to continue to give them their ear. They're going to continue to say things and speak about things and bring things up that Bitcoiners want to hear about. So, with all of these candidates in the race now, the ability to shape and limit the kind of information that people have access to, like this Durham report stuff. Now, I'm not saying Bitcoiners are going to go out and push the Durham report on people. That's not what I mean. I mean the ability to ignore something completely in order to get attention on something else and divert people's attention to more convenient debates that would reframe things. That is what's ending in the 2024 cycle, or is at least going to be challenged by these new perceptions coming in from different sources, and Bitcoiners being a major one, right? So it's not just things like and here's one with Vivek. I don't know if you guys saw this, right? And this is the kind of stuff that ends up backfiring. So yesterday, Vivek got locked out of his LinkedIn, right? His LinkedIn account. They censored him, right? So this is what happened. This is his own tweet, right? He says, big tech election interference has begun. LinkedIn locked my account and censored me this week for posting videos where I expressed fact-based views as a presidential candidate on climate policy. Just one second. So, so here's what he said: a self-made man with an. So they're talking about his relationships with China. Vivek bringing that stuff up, and Trish Regan had the following to say: "This is insane. LinkedIn just locked out one of the smartest, most articulate, upcoming conservatives in America. A self-made man with the intellect and background to scare the heck out of the left." Vivek Ramaswamy, it seems to me this is a form of election interference. LinkedIn has become too big and too much of a monopoly in the professional social media space to engage in activity like this. So right away, you're going to continue to get just surprising new counterpoints, surprising new angles. All of these innocents who use LinkedIn and say, oh, it's just a platform to find jobs and all that stuff. Now they're going to be forced to see these stories more and more, right? It's always the Newtonian aspect of it, right? It's the third principle of Newtonian physics, right? Action, reaction. Every one of these actions is going to have a reaction. There's little that can be done about that physical truism in the universe. And now that you've got someone like Vivek, and now that you've got all of these radical candidates that have thrown their hat into the US presidential election, many of them connected to the Bitcoin community, many of them strengthening their connections to the Bitcoin community. What I saw from RFK in Miami was, I think he understands that he's got some really powerful fighters in his corner as long as he keeps us there. I think he felt that enthusiasm from the audience. I think he has a ability to see that Bitcoiners are indeed the most financially literate group of voters in the American system. They're the most energy literate group of voters. They're the most media literate group of voters. And so Bitcoiners distinguish themselves, I think, at something like Bitcoin 2023 when they met these candidates, because the candidates right away perceive and understand that they've got a group that they don't really have to cater towards in terms of letting them hear what they want to hear. They can actually come out and say things a little more honestly, and Bitcoiners' perception will allow them to do that, right? They're not expecting to be spun and rolled. Now, of course, it's easy to write a love letter to Bitcoin and have Bitcoiners love you because you said it, right? Bitcoiners will always sort of faint and swoon over anyone who shows an interesting and insightful appreciation for Bitcoin. But it's kind of hard to fake in a sense, right? You can say, oh, Bitcoin is great. But once you start understanding some of the mental models that Bitcoiners really appreciate, you start getting into this world of understanding that spin and ignoring different stories is a form of censorship. Once you start getting sensitive and attuned to the issues of censorship and dopamine dealing, brainwash systems that get people addicted to outrage and anxiety and these different things. Once you start perceiving that, once you start seeing that the Bitcoin audience is not like that, you can speak to them differently. You can have more nuanced opinions. Bitcoiners aren't necessarily entirely aligned on a bunch of political issues. And as long as you're cool with Bitcoin, they're going to give you a lot of leeway with other issues, right? You see RFK, one of his blind spots, I would argue, is nuclear energy. I'd say most Bitcoiners who are RFK fans sort of waiting for him to either change his opinion or have a more detailed opinion or a more educated opinion or whatever, right? But people definitely giving him that space and definitely bringing what looks like a multitude of ideas to the table that just haven't been on the table before to debate and discuss, right? So because of that, you're starting to see more conversations around other things that are getting ignored, right? So, this whole thing in Ukraine, right, looks like we were talking about it yesterday. I said I had a feeling already a year and a bit ago, kind of dirty in a sense, talking about the Ukraine conflict for clicks or because everyone else was talking about it. So you got to do a video, you got to put it in your news show, you got to put it on your podcast, you got to talk about Ukraine. And there was a time last year when it just looked like everyone was doing that at the start of the war. And I immediately had this perception like, "Ooh, this is entertainment mixed with war." And The Atlantic ran an article on that today because these folks have been the worst when it comes to this. These folks have been lionizing people. They've been dramatizing people. They've been turning people into celebrities, fake war heroes getting constantly created in the media. And so now that American attention span is starting to wane on Ukraine, right? We've seen it go from all the money being sent, all the weapons being sent, all the times it was, we're at a turning point, we got to win this one. We got to win this one. At a certain point, that sort of runs out, right? So The Atlantic running this article yesterday, the war is not here to entertain you, right? That's their actual headline. And now they've got this new podcast called Radio Atlantic where they're talking about this whole thing, right? So again, it's not here to entertain you, even though that's how it's been presented to Americans for over a year and a half. So the tweet that comes with it is, the war in Ukraine is entering a critical moment, even as some Americans may be growing numb to it. In Radio Atlantic, this person, whoever it is, Hannah Rosen, speaks with Jeffrey Goldberg and Anna Applebaum about their reporting in Ukraine and why flagging attention doesn't matter, right? So, what I hear when I hear flagging attention doesn't matter? I hear the opposite. Flagging attention does matter, right? This was always a ratings game. And if the ratings are low, the appetite for other stories besides the fight for good and evil, the fight for the fight against Hitler 2.0, all of those narratives start to crumble, right? And you're going to get more and more people coming out of the woodwork, more and more interesting developments. Here's one from, Jerry Nadler. He's like a really little, and he puts his pants up really high, and he's like a very kind of joke-looking congressman. He's 60 something, 70 years old maybe, and looks very uncomfortable in his own skin and when he's wearing different. Oh, by the way, I got to go at 8:45 today, so I've only got 10 more minutes. Sorry about that, guys. I have a short Friday edition. Got some stuff to do. So here's what he said, right? So someone got this image of him in the hallways just chatting, and it's kind of like secretly taped on a phone or something. So Jerry Nadler said that he wouldn't care if Ukraine used the new F-16s that they're being sent to strike into Russian territory. He dismissed the likelihood of it happening and said that the Ukrainian forces deploying weapons in Russia would be able to take care of it. But imagine just saying very casually, "Oh, these F-16s, right? I don't care if they do any damage." The context of that is, and this is where people are suffering from not getting the context they need, right? And the media just not providing it, which means that because nature does abhor a vacuum, this cedes the territory to Bitcoiners and all of these people influencing candidates to force all of these issues into the forefront. And it looks like this, right? Kyle Becker says, this is the most important story of the day. A nuclear war in Europe with the potential to spread across the world would harm human civilization in countless ways and alter civilization in a catastrophic way forever. This needs to stop now. So you are going to get more attention placed on ending the war simply because the ratings are low, right? It gets canceled like any show. and if ratings are low, if the public isn't into it, if the attention requires too much servicing, right? Too many lies, too much effort, just like this Atlantic article. No, we don't. It's not about attention, right? We're here for other reasons. If all of that stuff starts to lag, then the vacuum opens up for these other stories to enter about ending it, and that aren't coming from these two political parties, right? So the way almost all information has worked for a long time now in media is exactly that, right? You get the media who decides what's important, puts a focus on it, and that those stories end up dominating the headlines. That has been the case for years in America, decades now. And it looks pervasive to this day. It looks like that's still what we suffer under. But this can change really quick. Really, really quick, especially when you start getting all of these candidates who are generating news themselves outside of this news generation cycle, like the Viveks, like the RFKs, right? So the potential for this to catch on, I think, is big, and the uh, the the capacity for Bitcoiners to bring these stories to the forefront is just beyond the, because especially when you get Republicans and Democrats, they seem inoculated by each other's points of view. And I've mentioned it before. You remember the Armageddon movie? This is what I said the very first time I saw um, RFK as a candidate for this election, right? When you put something inside of one of these echo chambers and it explodes, it will travel a lot further, that information, than it ever has before, right? We went from being stuck in these two solitudes and these fake prisons of two ideas where almost no information got outside of the echo chamber, and all of a sudden, because of Bitcoin, we have this common ground, and you're going to get things detonated inside the asteroid, right? Remember, there was like shoot nuclear bombs outside the asteroid, they'll deflect, drill a hole in the asteroid and blow up a nuclear bomb inside and save the world, right? So that's kind of what we're doing here. We're drilling holes inside of the asteroid and blowing it up from the inside. And that's what Bitcoin can do. And you'll see it in many, many stories, right? Bitcoiners increased energy literacy. Look at this story in Germany, right? So the Germans, again, it's between them, the Canadians, and the New Zealanders for stupidest people in the world. It's got to be, right? I want to see some kind of a game in lack of awareness, like a test in your lack of awareness. So how many of these hoaxes you fell for, right? And I just bet you, Canadians and Germans would be at the top of the list. But there's things that will break them out of it. Bitcoiner energy literacy is one of them. And you can see it now. Look at the rug pull. Look at this rug pull. You're going to laugh at this rug pull. So the Germans not only got rid of nuclear and patted themselves on the back and partied about when they got rid of nuclear and all of this stuff, right? They were so proud of themselves. Now they're going further, and all kinds of people bought these gas boilers last year for their houses in just the last few months. Now it turns out they're going to get rid of those gas boilers. So people bought brand new ones, and now they're going to ban them. So here's the Financial Times: outraged and furious, Germans rebel against gas boiler ban. And Javier Blas says the proposed boiler ban has already led to a series of unintended consequences. Around 168,000 gas boilers were sold in Germany in the first quarter of this year, a 100% increase on the previous year, and now they're going to ban them. This is a green policy, right? So what a rug pull, right? Now, contrast that with what's going on in Finland. Did you hear what's going on in Finland? Their new nuclear reactor, which we first mentioned here, right? That new nuclear reactor that they had that went online, I think, January or something. Anyway, we covered it here. So it turns out they're having to turn the dial down because energy has now gotten free. They're not even paying for electricity in Finland right now. The prices are free. And so instead of keeping the energy ramped up and inviting some Bitcoin miners, which they will probably do in the next few months, right now they're saying, oh, let's lower the amount of energy we create and just turn the dial down a bit so we don't have as much, so that it's not free, right? It happened to be free in the past few days, free. So think about it like this. You're going to get a place like Finland, which in a few months, right, as Bitcoin becomes the most important subject in the American election, Europe goes through another summer where energy needs are going to be, if they get any heat wave this summer, you're going to hear all the same stories that you hear every summer in Europe. Everybody's dying because they have no air conditioning and it's so hot on the 5th floor, on the 4th floor, blah, 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 blah. They get these stories every single year. Now you're going to get, not in Finland, obviously, not in Finland. But you're going to get stories of Bitcoin miners and free energy going on in Finland. And you're going to see that the literacy of the Europeans is going to have to either go up, or they're going to keep getting angry about stuff where they get rug pulled on making huge capital investments in their houses and their property, but it doesn't work out, right? So that's what's going on in all these places. And even here's another one of these interesting stories, right? You get the JP Morgan Chase. And again, the Jeffrey Epstein story. Remember, we were covering here the U.S. Virgin Islands case where, Biden just decided to take a Christmas vacation, an impromptu Christmas vacation, and goes to the U.S. Virgin Islands the same day that the governor fires the attorney general, who was the one starting the criminal proceedings against Epstein and JP Morgan, right? So she gets fired. And now we find out that the governor who fired her actually had his kids' tuition paid for by Epstein. Right? Now, I know it's not just Bitcoiners interested in the Epstein stuff. Everyone's interested in it. It is one of those stories that I think is going to help people break out of this fake prison of two ideas, because the information is so interesting, right? People want to know. And it's another one of those cases where they're going to see the things they haven't been told are so much more important relative to the news. And it's what they haven't been shown that are really the most important stories. And Bitcoiners are going to bring them pretty much every story they haven't been told, right? Global warming solved. We solved it. They just haven't heard the good news. So that's where we're at. So I don't have too much time. I'm going to read some of these comments real quick. Let's see what we got. One I love is right here now, called Top Chat. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. You can't use that racist water to put those fires. No, got some racist water. Did they capitalize science in that? I think they might have. Let's see. They did. They did. Science. No, it just could be the headline. Never mind. They capitalized everything. They capitalized. When are they going to raise the debt ceiling? They're negotiating it now. I mean, there's the talk around. There's the talk around. There's the talk around the IRS agents being one of the main critical issues. Will the DNC allow another JFK Maverick to win nomination? I don't think so, but you never know. There's a big opening for him to go third party, so I think he can do it. One day, Nolan will forget to press the mute button, and we'll hear him shout. Yeah, I don't get that angry when I shout. I just want them to hear me. So even if I forget, it's not going to be a big deal. Ren, my ex was addicted to conflict. Yeah, a lot of people are, man. A lot of people are. When you're around for a couple of cycles, you get an enthusiastic about politicians speaking positively about Bitcoin. Often give it a few months and you can see exactly who they are. Yes, P-Man Van, you are correct. You are correct. You are correct. CNN's ratings went down without Trump. Is the war just for entertaining purpose? Maybe. Yeah, Philippe, it's not a bad idea, but I think the ratings are down on the war too, right? The ratings are down on the war because no one knows what's going on, right? Money laundering for biolabs and war crimes, distraction from sudden death syndrome. The list goes on. Yeah. All right, team. Short show today. Got to get to the call. Peace.